everyone. My name is Emily Ansneck, the voice of Julia Stonewash and many others here on Jollyville Radio. I have the pleasure of interviewing someone I have been creeping on Twitter for a while. Wait, no, that's a super weird way to say it. Someone I've been appreciating on Twitter and following for a while. Jesse Stanchak of Micro Flash Fiction for today's Community Beat. So Jesse, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me. This is an absolute pleasure. So I got started writing flash fiction. I'm one of those people who always wanted to be a writer, but I have pretty bad ADD and a very busy schedule and uncountable half novels in drawers that I will never get back to. And it's a long-standing source of frustration for me. Then, I had a kid and it got even worse. And in 2017, I was asked to give a speech at the retirement party for my favorite high school teacher. And the speech went really well. People enjoyed it. And it was all about optimism and how the fact that the thing that I admired most about this guy who I'd kept in touch with over the years is that he never stopped growing as a person. He learned to play the mandolin and the piano and taught himself different languages as an adult. And very few people do things like that. And if, the moral of the speech was that if you were sad to see him moving on from teaching, you could honor his memory by going out and doing the same thing. And halfway back to my house, I'm driving along and it occurs to me that I am a total fraud. And I have not done these things at all. And after a couple weeks of having like a real existential crisis about this, I was like, okay, what can I do that I'll actually stick with? Yeah. And there are some creators online that I really admire who have had good luck with sort of creative forced marches. If you're familiar with like Song a Day or Jonathan Colton's early work, saying like, I'm going to make a thing a week or a thing a day or whatever. Yeah. And I said to myself, okay, I can commit to writing a short story a day if it's really short. Mm-hmm. And I have to do this in a public way so that people will notice, hypothetically, if I fall down on it. And there's another Twitter account that I really like, run by a guy named O. Wilson, whose Twitter handle is MicroSFF, Micro Science Fiction and Fantasy. Okay. And I've been following him for a long time. And it's like, you know what? I feel like I could manage that. I could manage writing Twitter fiction. And my professional background is I was a reporter in an earlier life. Oh, and I cool. I used to cover Congress, and I did what's called documents-based reporting. And basically I would read these enormous federal documents, GAO reports and
super enriching,
all kinds of stuff.
Lively documents. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like in a couple sentences tell you what actually happened in them and why you should care. Oh, and so, and then for a while I wrote, newsletter summaries for a news aggregation company. And so being able to condense stuff is sort of in my blood. And I said, okay, yeah, I can do this. I can write really tiny stories. And for some reason I was like, yeah, in fact, this is so easy. I'm going to do 3 of these a day. And I managed to do that every day without exception for 5 years.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. That's very impressive.
I made myself take a break this past July for a couple of months, and now I'm back at it again at a slightly lower pace, just because it was getting to be a little bit stressful. But yeah, I've written well over 5,000 of these things, and what they are self-contained short stories that are under 280 characters, and they're all different kinds. I think the thing that distinguishes me from other people who do this is if you read like an O. Weston short story, like they're all, generally science fiction, fantasy, and they always have kind of like an upbeat tone. Mm-hmm. Or there's another account that I really like called Control Creep, and his are all really kind of dark and moody, sort of Black Mirror-esque stuff. And I can't be funny all of the time. and I can't be creepy all of the time. I'm an incredibly moody person. So, especially because I'm doing it at this like really high volume, I ended up with sort of a Cuisinart, blender approach to fiction writing, where everything, is a different genre or a different style or a different approach. And some of them are really weird and some of them are more conventional, and it runs the gamut. And, what I ended up with after 5 years is sort of a map of the inside of my mind, and all of the things that I'm obsessed with and think about all the time. Because, if you're constantly trying to come up with new ideas or new things to talk about, then you have to get kind of in touch with, your subconscious and what's really going on there. And after about 4 years of doing this in 2021, I put out a book of them. It's called,
I was gonna say, I haven't.
Awesome.
It's very good. I cannot recommend it enough. Yeah. Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was
sure,
it's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. It's called The Tyranny of Sand and Other Tiny Stories, which pretty much as soon as I wrote the title story for this, I was like, oh, that's definitely what I'm calling the book, because both because I think it's a cool line, but also because it's about the way tiny things can gang up on you. Which is metaphorically resonant for both the things that are in the book and the process of writing the book itself. It's a sand dune of the mind.
Nice, awesome. Well, speaking of the book, the book is you've written thousands of stories, but it's 280 in the book, which I'm assuming correlates with the 280 characters on Twitter. So how did you pick the 280?
Oh, that was excruciating. If I were a wealthy man, I would have paid somebody else to do this for me. It was like having to pick your favorite child. It was terrible. So I self-published this. I shopped it around, and I eventually decided to go this other route after I had a literary editor who is a fan of my work and an incredibly generous person named Janet Reed tell me basically, you are never going to sell this because no one will ever know what to do with it. Like, it's too many things at once. And I was like, no, that's fair. But I know what it is, and I know how to talk about it. So I decided to just do the work myself. And it involved basically exporting all of my tweets into a spreadsheet and going through and deleting initially all of the ones that made me feel embarrassed, and then, sort of winnowing it down slower and slower. And then at a certain point, it wasn't necessarily even about like, okay, what are the best ones in air quotes? But it's about like making sure that it's representative of the Twitter account, because again, like part of my whole shtick is that it's a lot of different flavors and a lot of different styles. And if I only did the sad ones or the scary ones or the funny ones, you might have an incorrect idea of what this account was and what it meant to me during that period of time. So it's organized into chapters. A lot of people who've done books like this, it's either, there's no structure to it at all, or it's more thematic. Like, these are, stories about, I don't know, Christmas, or they're ones about, family or whatever. And mine are maybe a little more conceptual. It's things like, I was going to say,
you have one. It was sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. But what I enjoyed about this book was like, there was probably maybe 20, 30 per chapter. Yeah. And then the chapter would be totally different the next one. So it's like love and what we do for it. And then literally the next one is myth and monsters. And then, but just like all these random, like it was almost like, it was great because you had no idea what was coming next.
Yeah.
Like you read all these great stories that were really moving and just very impressive. And then you're like, wow, we're talking about something totally different over here. Like, that's what I enjoyed about it, because it kind of kept me on my toes while I was reading.
Yeah, it also frankly gave me a way of warning people. Particularly there's a chapter in there called Grief and Other Ways We Know We're Alive. And those are all the saddest ones. And, like, hey, if you're having a day where maybe that's not what you need, don't read that chapter. Save that one for another day. Which isn't to say that like all of the ones in all of the other chapters are happy. It's just like grief is always heavy. And it was a way of sort of like organically doing that. I've had a lot of people approach me on Twitter and say like, oh, I really wish you would do like content warnings for things. And like in theory, I agree with it, but it fights the format so intrinsically, because I would spend, an entire tweet explaining what you're about to read, and then you would read it, and I don't know, it would lose something. I wish, maybe you could color code them or, allow people to filter things out sort of on their end, but it just isn't set up that way. This is a way that I could give people, a little bit of agency to say like, I only want to read love stories right now. That's all I've got bandwidth for.
Yeah, that's fair. If you don't mind, I have actually selected some of my favorites from this, which is kind of like asking again, like picking a favorite child. It's impossible. I think the one that has stuck out to me, and this is the one I went to, I was like, I actually remembered where in the book it was because I loved this one. I think this is actually my favorite. So it's part of the, I don't even know what section it's in. It's in your first section, Space and How We Fill It. That's the last one in there. And it says, after the universe has ended, there is a small lump in the fabric of the space where creation used to be. Sleepily, the last cat pokes its head out, beholds oblivion with begrudging approval, and curls back up to sleep. Like, I love that one. I don't know why. I think it's because it's the most cat thing ever. But I think what's impressive is how well you tell a narrative in 280 characters. Like, I think that's also what has like kept me reading your work. So I guess is there specific things that have inspired some of your stories or anything based on real life? Like any examples you want to share there?
Definitely. So I am a cat person. I have two cats.
What are their names?
And sure. Ferdinand and Isabella. Nice. Isabella's the smart one. Ferdinand's the stupid one. And I don't know. A lot of these I remember writing, and that one I absolutely remember writing. And it was Ferdinand had done something really dumb, and I was like, a lesser cat would have just died, like falling off of the counter the way you just did. But you're fine. You're going to outlive the universe. And then just that mental image really stuck with me. And that was actually one of the very last ones that made it into the book. That was a really a hard choice. Initially, there was a whole chapter that was nothing but animal stories, and it felt both. It was hard to kind of like make it a balanced experience because some of the animal ones are sad, and some of them aren't, but they also. My output lends very heavily toward cats, and I didn't want people to feel like, I don't know, it was just cats. It's funny you bring that up. The one that I published right before we sat down to talk is about somebody who's a dog assassin.
Yes. Okay.
Like an assassin just for dogs. So yes, I'm not anti-dog. It just turned out that way.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
That's great. I can read it if you want. I have it right in front of me.
If you want.
Oh, it's up to you.
Okay, sure.
All right. As a dog assassin, Ducamp does not judge. Each client comes with a story, and most are not about the dog. It's often enough to make the client just believe the dog is dead. But some owners want to dispatch a sick pet without having to be there. Only those truly tug at her heart.
Yeah. That actually came just from the idea. So Ferdinand, the stupid cat, is getting old and sick, and like we're not at that point yet, but we're getting closer to it. And I was thinking about how like in a moment of weakness, like I wish that like I could hire the Viper to take him out when I won't be suspecting it, and then the grief could come by surprise, because cats, and dogs and all pets, they can't understand when you're saying goodbye. And that's heartbreaking, but obviously that would be selfish. I would never hire a cat assassin.
That's fair. That's good. Thanks for clarifying for our listeners.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Not pro pet murder.
Yes. Gotta put that one out there. Gotta make that one clear. So kind of shifting away a little bit. So some of your stories, you touch different topics and things. And has there been a story where you intended it to be funny or sad or something, but you realize the audience interpreted it in an entirely different way. Do you have an example of that, or like?
Yeah. There are a couple of instances like that. There are. So on one end of the spectrum, once I told the story about the intimacy of explaining a scar, and how, in some ways, that depending on what the story is, that can be more intimate than kissing somebody. And I had somebody who was apparently disfigured come to me and be like, "Hey, the way you describe that is accurate, but it is also a little bit like exploitative, I guess." Okay. And like, I was like, huh, wow, I was really thinking about this like in an intellectual way. And that is your lived experience. And it's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I apologized to them. And I asked, like, hey, do you want me to take that down? Like, does that bother you? And they said, no, I want you to sit with that and think about it. So, that's cool. The flip side of that, is, and I'm a big believer in never telling people that they're wrong about your work. And, my stock answer, when people are like, oh, does X mean Y? I'll always say, all versions are canon. Like, if you believe that story is the way that plays out, then that's true for you. The thing I'm probably best known for is a story about vampire missionaries. And, periodically people will ask me, like, are the vampires actually going to eat the person who answers the door? Or are they actually, just sort of like trying to spiritually enlighten people about the word of Dracula? And like, I don't know. It genuinely is up to you. And all versions are canon. I don't want the authority of saying that finally. That's why I ended the story where I did. And sometimes people will read things into my stories that I didn't mean at all, that like make me really make me happy. Like they'll see a joke that I didn't intend, or it'll bring out a meaning for them that I didn't intend. One thing that always makes me happy is it's not a commercial for this. I happen to be a religious person, and while my fiction is not religious, it just sort of, if you're drawing a map of the inside of your mind, that's going to be part of it.
Sure.
And there are absolutely religious stories on the account, but they're not commercials for my particular belief system. And occasionally I will have people who are not of that persuasion, say like, I really like this one. Like this really speaks to me. And it's really, and I know from talking to them or from their bio that like, they've got a different outlook on the world. And it's cool to me that like I was able to make something coming from this place where we are diametrically opposed, but we could kind of meet in that space in between and share an idea. There's one about someone being given a color that I think is in the book. And in my mind, and this is not explicit to the story, in my mind, the speaker is God. And it's somebody saying like, like literally this color reminds me of you. And that would be like such an insane thing to hear. And I've had a lot of people tell me that like that one is meaningful to them. And it reminds them of like thinking about maybe getting to talk to a loved one who has passed for the last time, maybe, because again, it's written in a very oblique way. And, that's a very human approach. It's a completely different way of thinking about that story. But I don't know. I love that art is one of the, I guess, the last ways that we have of talking to each other in areas where we disagree.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. I'm just going to let that sit for a second because that was such a great comment. What advice do you have for people, since you've been doing this for 5 years and you took a little break and you've come back, who want to kind of dabble in it, but again, they have the half-written novels or the things like, what advice do you have for them since you've been in that position?
So a couple of bits of advice. In no particular order, we'll talk about productivity, we'll talk about technique, and we'll talk about the internet. Cool. So productivity, I think commitments are good. Saying, to people like, I'm going to do this X number of times, a day, every day, no matter what. And like, I got COVID and was still writing these things.
Oh, wow. Good for you. Like, kind of impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how to feel about that.
I was writing them, literally, in line at Disneyland. Those are different days. I didn't have COVID at Disney.
Oh yeah, I was just at home.
But like good days, bad days, doesn't matter. Like I was doing this, and honestly, I was a little scared that like if I stopped having kind of that unbroken chain of days that like it would fall apart, and it hasn't. But I think initially giving yourself sort of a commitment that is public is a really great way of making sure that you do the work, right? I'm a big believer that you have to tell bad stories in order to eventually tell good stories. And if you went all the way back to, when I started the account, like almost all of the early ones are really bad. I think it takes me about 6 months of writing 3 of these a day before like, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good one. There are like 1 or 2 maybe in the book from the first 6 months, but it's not a great success rate. And again, I'm doing this publicly. Yeah. And trying to get people invested in a project when like I'm very clearly still figuring out what I'm doing. So yeah, I think if you want to do it, throw your head in the ring, get explicit about it. Tell people this is what I'm going to be doing. And then you expect something of yourself in that way. Secondly, talking about technique, I think the biggest problem that a lot of writers run into, and I don't just mean writers of fiction, I mean like people who write emails, to their coworkers. I think one of the biggest problems that people have in writing is that they don't know what they're actually trying to say when they start. Okay. That is the key to writing short, is knowing what are you actually trying to convey? Because, if I wanted to, I could have spent that story about the dog assassin. I could have spent that whole time talking about different ways to kill dogs.
True.
That doesn't get at the point of it. Like the fact that they're a dog assassin is in the service of something. Yeah. So you can be, it forces you to say, the format forces you to say, what is actually important to me here? What is the key? What is the heart of it? And to drill down on that. And that, I do write longer pieces of fiction. I do write longer things. And that is exactly as true in longer stuff. If you don't have that intention, if you don't have that sense of like, what is this story actually about? You're going to end up wasting a lot of people's time. And frankly, this doesn't come up as much with tweets, but with longer pieces, you get into structural questions. Yeah. And that all kind of falls apart when you don't know what you're actually trying to say. And then lastly, just a bit about the internet. If you're trying to make art on the round, if you're trying to do this in a way where the creation of the art is public, you have to develop coping mechanisms for that. We talked a little bit about people coming up with different interpretations of stories that I've written. Yeah. And there are absolutely instances where people have misrepresented things in bad faith. And if I let that get to me, it would destroy me utterly. Yeah. That is part of why I started saying all versions are canon to people.
That's fair.
Because it frees me from the expectation of, thinking that everybody's going to understand what I meant. Mm-hmm. And it also frees me from the expectation that I have to correct you if you get something quote unquote wrong. Because it doesn't belong to me anymore. It's off in the world and it has its own life that is independent of me.
Nice. Awesome. So I got to ask, are you going to come out with another book?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this and I think I want to do it. The question is, okay, how do I do it in a way that isn't just I don't want it to be a direct sequel, like exactly the same format, but then
you could. I would read it. I would read literally an exact, with 280 different stories. I'd read it again. same format. I'm for it.
No,
So
I
be the easy way
appreciate
out.
that.
I'll support you.
I appreciate that. But yeah, it was fun to do. It was an interesting challenge. It's just a question of like, okay, what's the best way to outline stories or to put something interesting into the world.
Nice, cool. Well, how can people find you online? How can people get connected?
Yeah, sure. I'm real easy to find at microflashfic on Twitter. My DMs are open. I'm extremely easy to get a hold of. I love talking to people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story about your stories.
I appreciate it.
So this has been great. And I look forward to kind of seeing what else you create every day. So thank you again for coming. And for everybody, for our listeners, thanks for listening to this Community Beat. This is Emily Ansneck, and you've been listening to Jollyville Radio, KJVR.
Hello, Michael Crosa here. I wanted to give a big thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring the show. So I've mentioned before that Jollyville Radio was a very large piece of my coping strategy during the isolation of the pandemic. That's true, but there were also other pieces. BetterHelp was one of those. It was a part of my support network during that time. You see, BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable. That could be text, chat, phone, video call. You can message your therapist at any time and then schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you. There's more scheduling flexibility, and it's at a more affordable price. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Jollyville. That's betterhelp.com/Jollyville. The cast of Jollyville Radio Season 5 includes Emily Ansneck, John Cook, Michael Crosa, Robin Crosa, Michelle Darcy, Jamie Davis, Richard Dayries, Johanna Fredrickson, Brian Green, Elissa Marks, Liz Rader-Hagler, Matt Waite, and Kay Wise Denty.
Our Season 5 Writers Room: Emily Ansneck, Michael Crosa, Jillian Dull, Brian Green, Kay Wise Denty, Liz Rader-Hagler. And a thank you to our editors who make this podcast jolly: Michael Crosa, Jamie Davis, and Richard and Monsi Dayries.
Season 5 is directed by Michael Crosa with help from assistant directors Jamie Davis and Emily Ansneck. Music by Michaels Crosa and Stanley. Additional editing and graphic design support from Workergenics. This podcast was produced by Chattanooga Podcast Studios. Find out more at ChattanoogaPodcastStudios.com. For KJVR in Jollyville, I'm Jimmy Pie Crust. We'll see you next time on Jollyville Radio.